So now it's time for the road test. And you've gone through the initial inspections of the engine compartment, underneath the car. You've done your interior test. You've done your walk around test. Now it's time for the road test. We need to see how well the car drives. And this test should be about 15 minutes minimum and possibly 20 minutes. And you want to do both highway and city driving. In other words, you want to bring it up to 60 miles an hour or better, and you want to drive locally on just regular streets where you have stop signs and so forth. That would be city driving. And the first test we're going to do is the brake test. And of course, the brake test, we want to make sure that nobody is behind us when we're doing this, or closely behind us. And we want to pretty much do it on a safe road, very little traffic. We're going to ride down the road, let's say at 30, 35 miles an hour, and we're going to press on the brakes. And what we're looking for is we're looking to see if the car stops straight, or does it pull left or pull right. If it's pulling in one direction when you press the brakes, it typically means that the brakes are wearing unevenly and they need to be looked at. So make a note of that. And I always tell you, when you're going to look at a car, inspect a car that you want to buy, I would always suggest that you bring a friend and a notepad and have them take notes for you. This way you can focus on the inspection and they can record things that you might want to bring up with the seller. So that's the first thing. You want to see if it pulls left or right. When you press the brakes, does the steering wheel shake? Once again, we could be either on the highway now at maybe 60 miles an hour, or on a road where you're going 35, 40 miles an hour. And when you press the brake, if the steering wheel shakes, that could indicate there's a problem in the suspension. So we need to pay attention to that. It can also indicate that a rotor, and you don't have to know what a rotor is, but that's part of the braking system, that the rotor is out of round, or I should say out of balance. And if it's out of balance, when the pad presses against it, it could vibrate or shake the wheel. Pay attention to that. The next thing is the pedal. If you push on the brake pedal, it should feel firm. In other words, when you push down with your foot, you should feel a nice firm braking. Okay, it maybe travels a little bit and then stops. That's a firm brake pedal. If it goes to the floor, or you have to pump it to bring it up to where it should be, that's indicating that there could be air in the lines. Could be the brake pads are wore out, but just make a note of it. Make a note that there's something wrong with the brakes. And then finally, if you hit the brakes and you hear a grinding or scraping or squealing, that's indicating there could be metal on metal. The brake pad itself is worn so bad that it's scraping. It could mean there's a groove in the rotor. You don't have to know that, but that's when you would hear the grinding noise and the brakes need attention. Very important that you follow this. And finally, does the vehicle stop smoothly in a straight line? Really, when you're hitting the brakes, it's about everything feeling normal. If you noticed any things we just talked about, they need attention. If you press the brakes and the car stops like it should, everything's good. Now we move to the transmission check. And once again, the transmission check is basically you're trying to figure out if there's anything wrong with the transmission or could be going wrong with the transmission. And you're going to do it through the drive. Very simply, does the transmission shift smoothly through every gear? And what I mean by that is you're driving the car around town, for example, slow speeds, you're going 35 miles an hour in the city, and everything feels normal. It feels nice, smooth. You shouldn't notice a transmission. Then you get on the highway and you accelerate. And you're accelerating on the highway. Once again, everything should feel normal. You shouldn't feel anything with the transmission. It should feel just nice. You're riding down the road. One thing you need to do is test if it engages in drive and reverse. And typically the way that you do that is, let's say that you have to back out of the driveway of the seller's house. When you put it into reverse, pay attention. The reverse motion takes 1 second. So you put it into reverse, and 1 second later, you should feel the car wanting to go backwards. And it's the same in forward. 1 second. So you put it into drive after you back out. It should take literally 1 second for the car to want to go forward. If you accelerate in reverse, you're trying to back out of driveway and the car's not really moving, but it feels like it's engaged, and you press on the accelerator and the engine raises up. You hear it get louder or more RPM on the engine, and it doesn't back up like it should. Transmission slipping. You put it in drive. You accelerate, and as you accelerate on the gas pedal, the car doesn't move with the same proportion as the acceleration. That's the slipping transmission. You also want to notice for any banging, jerk, or harshness between the gears. So you put it into drive, and you hear boom. That's the banging. That's the thing banging into gears. Pay attention to that. Does it constantly hunt between gears while driving at steady speed? So you're on the highway, let's say. You're going 60 miles an hour, or you're going up to 55, or whatever it is, and you feel it lunging and slowing up and lunging and slowing up. It's hunting for gears. If you're going down the road at 20, 30 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour in the city, and you feel it trying to find a gear, it'll lunge forward, it'll go back. It'll lunge forward, it'll go back. It's a problem with the transmission. Pay attention to those. You don't have to be a mechanic. I can't stress this enough. You just have to notice things that don't feel correct, and then have your partner jot them down, the person that's with you. Now we're going to do a very important test called the circle test. And what you're going to do is you're going to go look for an empty parking lot somewhere, maybe a Walmart where nobody parks, or anywhere that's a big parking lot. And you want to turn the car fully to the right. So you turn the wheel, you're going to do a full circle. It's called the circle test. And as you turn it to the right, you're going to drive in a circle to the right. And you're going to listen. And what you're listening for is you're listening for popping noises or clicking noises. And if you hear them, let's say if you drive to the right and you hear them, that's a problem with the CV joint, possibly. And if you do the same thing to the left and you hear them to the left, that's another possible issue with another CV joint. You have left and right CV joints. And here's what might be happening. If the boot, that's a rubber part that goes around the CV joint. The CV joint is the thing that turns the wheels, both left and right. If the boot has a rip in them, and it does happen frequently, they dry out, they get brittle, they break, they crack, they rip, the grease will come out of the CV joint. And as the grease comes out, it also allows dirt to get in. And that will wear out the actual bushings that are in the CV joint. Hence, the problem of it doing a clicking or a popping noise as you're turning. And as you turn the wheel, do you hear any grinding or rubbing noises? That could be the CV joint rubbing on something. The bearings are rubbing on metal. So listen for that. Very important. And then you want the steering wheel to turn smoothly. You don't want to have to force it either left and right. That's a problem with the steering possibly, or the CV joint. And when you're doing this circle, feel the steering wheel for vibration or possible shuddering of the wheel. And if it's doing that, it's all pointing to a very real possibility that you have a problem with the CV joint. And finally, we're going to do the highway vibration test, I call it. And the most common reason you would feel vibration on the highway is that the tires are either out of balance, they could be out of round, or they could be blemished or have a bulge in them. And a bulge means that the sidewall is actually giving way. Sometimes it happens on the bottom. I've seen that. What happens is it creates a vibration in the steering wheel. So let's say that you're driving down the road and you're going 60 miles an hour and everything feels fine. Then you go 62 miles an hour, and all of a sudden the steering wheel starts to shake. That typically is the wheels are out of balance. Another thing to pay attention to is if you feel a shake in the seat at that speed, or any speed thereabouts or above, that's showing you, and most people don't even realize it, that the rear tires could be out of balance. So the front tires being out of balance would be a steering wheel shake, and a seat shake would be the rear wheels being out of balance. Pay attention to that. Make a note of it. And then, does the vibration get worse as the speed increases? That could mean suspension problems. Okay, the front suspension could be literally loose somewhere, and I'll tell you a story about that. Or does the vibration change and become worse when you brake, when you hit the brake? And my neighbor had a Jeep Rubicon that he bought. It was a 2021, fairly late model Jeep. I think he had 80 or 100,000 miles on it. And he says, you got to go for a ride with me. He says, something weird's happening. And I said, sure, I'll go for a ride. So we get on the highway. We get on 85. He's going 60, 65 miles an hour. And he says, watch this. And he hits a pothole that he saw coming up. And all of a sudden, the car starts vibrating. Seriously, the steering wheel. And as we went down the road, it got worse and worse and worse. And it was scary worse. I said, how do you stop this? He says, I literally have to pull off the road and slow down to 30 miles an hour or less. And it'll go away, and then I can start driving again. I said, wow, that's serious. So we looked it up online, and we found out that the problem he was having is actually common in that particular vehicle, and they actually named it the death wobble. In fact, you can Google in YouTube, or you can go to YouTube search and look up death wobble in Jeep Rubicon, and it'll show you exactly what's going on. In fact, we did that, and a guy put a camera on his front bumper looking underneath the car, and the whole suspension was vibrating. What had happened, we found out, was the two bolts that hold the suspension, the front suspension on these bars that connect to the frame or the unibody, those two bolts oval out, I guess, if you go off-road. They get worn. They're not strong enough, and they get worn to the point where the whole car wobbles. It's all about paying attention. And then finally, you want to make sure that the vehicle tracks straight. And what I mean by that is you don't want to constantly correct the steering wheel. So you're driving down the road, you're on the highway, let's say, you're on 85 or Route 95 or whatever road you're on, and you're going 60 miles an hour, but you're constantly having to turn the wheel a little bit. There's a couple reasons that may happen. The one we want to find out is if it's because the wheels are out of line. A lot of times the roads are curved for water drainage. And if you're in the curved part of the road where the major water is draining, that curved part could make the car pull to one direction. If you're feeling that pull, before you decide it needs a wheel alignment, move to the center lane. If there's no center lane, move to the right lane. And the reason you're doing that is you're trying to verify that the reason it's pulling is the curvature of the road, not because it's out of a line. Now, if you move to the center, let's say, or to the other lane, and it still pulls in the same direction, that's wheel alignment. Typically, a wheel alignment is going to cost you a minimum of $100. So this is another negotiating factor. That's pretty much everything that you need to do as far as the road test goes, except for one last thing I'd like to mention. And I tell everybody to do this. At the end of your road test, let's say you've driven 15 minutes, you want to make a stop. And that stop's going to be either AutoZone, O'Reilly's, or Advanced Auto. And you're going to pull in there and you're going to go inside and you're going to ask them if they could give you an OBD2 code scan. And they'll do it for free. And they'll give you a printout, by the way. So if they find any codes that the car has registered that could be problems, you'll have a printout of those codes now. And by the way, the reason you do that after the drive, after the 15 minutes, is a lot of times the codes won't show up until you've driven the car for a certain amount of time. And I hate to say this, but a lot of sellers will erase the codes right before you get there, and there'll be no check engine light on. All of a sudden, you're driving at 15, 20 minutes and a check engine light comes on. And you need to know if that's happening. And by the way, even if the check engine light doesn't come on, but it's registering code issues, like an O2 sensor, for example, those codes will show up when they do that scan. And now you have another negotiation issue with your seller, that you can show him that there's codes. And I'm actually going to teach you in the next lesson how to explore the codes to the point you'll know if it's time to walk away or it's time to maybe negotiate a better price. And we've spent the last 20 lessons roughly learning how to inspect a used car. But I created an app called Car Value Scout, and the reason I created that was so you wouldn't have to try to remember all these things or bring a notepad with you and try to remember them. The app actually walks you through the process, step by step, and it estimates the possible repair cost. It will allow you to punch in those OBD2 codes in a code field on the app, and it'll tell you the possible repair cost. It'll give you a fair price for the vehicle, and it'll eliminate the possibility of missing expensive problems. You don't have to be a mechanic, and I keep stressing that. You just need the right information. That's exactly why I created Car Value Scout, your real-time used car buying guide. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.